In this video, we're going to explain and demonstrate one of the simplest and most effective techniques to get virtually any dog to stop pulling on leash. The technique involves a simple about turn, but as always, it's the details that make the difference. So one of the main benefits of this kind of technique versus like a more traditional, like just kind of pulling on the dog's leash, is that from the dog's perspective, when you do it right, you are not correcting them. Their behavior resulted in this consequence, right? And specifically, it's their lack of attentiveness that results in it. And from the dog's perspective, you're just walking. Like, you're just walking without much regard for what they're doing, which is really the flip, the reverse of what often goes on with a dog and a human, where usually the dog is walking without any regard for the human, and the human's carefully paying attention and walking behind them. So we're really reversing the roles a little bit. And I always tell people it's kind of like a physics lesson, right? I'm a bigger piece of mass than you are, and you're attached to me with a rope. So it's sort of in your best interest to pay attention to what's going on. But there's a few details that will really dictate how effective this is or whether or not it actually works for the particular dog. These details become increasingly more important the shorter your leash gets. So for any of you guys that have been around for a while, if you've ever read the Keeler method of training, okay? This is a direct variation of Keeler's long line work. On a long line, your technique doesn't have to be so perfect. And you'll kind of see why as we go along. But you've got some wiggle room, partially due to the length of the line. You've got more time to take when you turn and make the adjustments that you need to make. On a shorter leash, you've got to have better technique, you've got to have better timing in order for this all to work right. I'm going to be walking forward toward whatever is distracting to the dog. And often if you're on a sidewalk, that's just anything in front of you. And the moment that I lose the mental connection between him and myself, regardless of whether he's right next to me or not, I'm going to pivot and go the other way. All right? So that's the first key point is I'm not waiting until he's already at the end of the leash. This is not about him being in certain proximity to me. It's about where he is mentally, not physically. So I want to start with him relatively close, and the moment he loses focus, I turn and go the other way. And that's important because he shouldn't be able to feel me go the other way. If the leash is already tight, he's going to feel that happening. The element of surprise is part of what works in your favor here. Second thing that's important is how I turn. So a big mistake that often gets made is when people make their pivot, they do like a curve, kind of like this, and it almost ends up looking like a teardrop shape, right? Where like if I was on a line, I might still end up back on my line, but I kind of made this little bubble out there. That's going to be problematic when you're on a short line. On a long line, it doesn't matter so much. On a short line, it matters because what's going to tend to happen is the dog's going to get to the end of the line while you're, like if he's going this way, you might be still kind of angling around. It's not going to be this opposing forces, which is really what you want, okay? So I want to make sure that when I pivot, I'm really staying on the exact same line that I was before. It's going to be also important that I don't jerk with my hands as I do this, okay? So again, you'll see people turn, but as they do this. And now again, I'm sort of pulling him around in a circle. And not only that, I shortened up my leash as I was turning by pulling my arm out, which gave him almost no time to actually react to me turning and make the right choice. But also, if he looks at me, I'm correcting him instead of I'm just walking. Because again, the real beauty of this approach is by the time the dog figures out to stay close to you and pay attention, they think it was their own idea. We want to make the dog want to stay close to us and want to pay attention to us, not do it because it's a rule and because we said so, right? It's a totally different psychology behind why the dog ends up doing it. And when a dog does something and they think it was their own idea, they're almost always going to be more reliable at doing it, right? And that's a really important thing to remember. When a dog thinks something was their own idea, they're going to be a million times more reliable than when it's a rule and they just don't want you to give them a consequence for breaking the rule, okay? Okay, so first thing is, you're gonna face this wall, right? And all I want you to do is bend your left leg and push in that direction, like a shuffle step, just like that.
So you just want to do a shuffle step?
Just like, that's it, yeah. But make sure you bend your leg and push, okay? And the reason that bending your leg is important is because if you have a powerful dog, you need to lower your center of gravity a little bit, but also this is where the correction is gonna come from. This is a huge muscle. You have a lot of strength here. If you're upright and you're just like this, you don't have a lot of power. And if you're in that position when the dog hits the end of the line, you're just gonna absorb it all with your body. Or you're gonna go down, right, if you're not a good handler. So get the person used to bending their leg and pushing in that direction, almost like you're on a skateboard, you're pushing, right? So that's the action that you wanna feel, is that push, right? From there, once you've got that down, the next thing is to be able to push and rotate, so you end up going that way, right? So instead of just, I'm still facing the wall, it's I push and now I'm here, and I can continue walking, okay? Once you've got that, right, so it's easy now, push and off I go, I can walk away. Then you want to start it from this position, right? So if the dog's on your left, when you're getting ready to pivot, your last step forward is going to be your left foot going here, pushing, and now you're there. It's a really simple motion, but if somebody doesn't know how to do it, they're not going to pivot right. They're going to trip over their own feet. We see it happen all the time. So either what you get is that teardrop shape. Sometimes you see people kind of almost like stop their body and like rotate like a pencil, you know, very upright and then go, which again, you have no strength or stability. So it's really important just to make it that clean. If I was on the seam of the floor here, I can do this and I'm still on that seam. My feet never left it, right? And that's what you want, almost like you're walking on a balance beam. That's going to ensure that when the dog gets to the end of the line, you have completely opposing forces, which is what you want. So when the dog hits the end of the line, it should almost feel like if a dog were tied to a tree and there was some slack in the line and they got excited and ran and hit the end of it. That's what it should feel like for the dog. It should be solid, okay? So that's the first thing. So once you've got that down, then I would teach you how to hold the leash, which is going to be a thumb lock, but you're familiar with a thumb lock, correct? Kind of, right? So I'll show you again when you get him. And that's just a matter of keeping that hand braced, dropping the slack, turn, and go. And when you go, like really go. So you don't want to do this move where you kind of like push. Everyone wants to look back and see what the dog's doing before they go the other direction. It needs to be one fluid motion. I'm walking out of the grocery store, forgot my wallet. Right? Like that's the energy that you want to have. And of course, if you have a softer dog, don't take off so fast, right? You have a harder dog, like really make sure you push and you go. It's really important to be able to do that. I'm going to walk forward, and when he gets distracted, I'm going to pivot, and I'm going to go the other way. And so he hits the end of the line, and when he does, and he finally turns around and looks, he's just seeing my back. And I'm not looking back at him, I'm not talking to him, it's like I forgot my wallet, right? And he wasn't paying attention, and he happens to be attached to me with a rope. That's all it is. You really want to make sure you give the dog enough leash as you do this. If I'm holding onto the leash here, and I just turn, I just pull him around in a circle. It's not at all the same effect, not even close. So my right hand holds the end of the leash. I usually do a thumb lock, which is thumb through the loop, grasping your hand over the rest. I tell people to brace that hand against their abdomen. People that are really terrible at doing that, I tell them to hook their thumb in their belt so they don't move it, okay? But you want to be close to your center of gravity here. When I get ready to pivot, the first thing I'm going to do is drop the slack with my left hand. Most people, I just tell them to let go. Some people, I tell them to bring their hand here for extra support, okay? You can pick up the slack again as the dog comes around and follows you so that they don't step over the leash, but they have to let go of that leash. The dog has to have enough room to make the mistake so that by the time they hit the end of the line, you're going the other way. You can't be in the middle of the turn when it happens. And a lot of people like to try and make the correction happen on the twist, right? Like they do this like, yeah, kind of thing. Don't do that, right? Again, from the dog's perspective, that looks very purposeful, right? You're doing this thing to catch them. I got you, right? That's not what we want this to be for the dog. The correction should come from me pushing off my leg in the opposite direction. So I drop the slack, I push, and that's where he gets corrected. So I walk him forward, I'll wait for him to get a little excited because he sees someone new, then I pivot, he wasn't paying attention, I'm going this way now, right? And notice when he's catching up to me, he's looking at me, he's like, oh my God, you left. I did not realize that. Now of course on a training collar it takes less reps, but notice already, even though Amy was moving and he was somewhat distracted, he still had peripheral attentiveness to me. So on that repetition, when I turned, he turned and followed, because he's figuring out that it's kind of in his best interest to pay attention to what I'm doing. And your corrections will tend to get softer and softer as you go along, because the dog will have less momentum going forward, they'll be a little bit more cautious, they'll be keeping their eyes on you a little bit better. There, when I dropped the slack, he had already stopped moving forward, right? So he's already figuring out what he needs to do. Perfect. And you can see how if you don't give enough leash, the dog can't succeed. Because it takes reaction time, right? I don't want him to be like, the moment I pivot, he's like, ah! Right? He can do it in a casual way, but just be paying attention to what's going on. That's the lesson here, right? So he should look rather relaxed as he does it. And if your leash is too short, you'll get a really edgy dog, because they have to have such quick reflexes in order to win that game that it's like virtually unfair to them. When you do it right, it's an easy thing for the dog to figure out. It usually doesn't take more than a couple corrections, and they're like, ah, okay, I got it. Pay attention to you, that doesn't happen, we're good to go. So I'm gonna give it to you. Thumb lock is just thumb through the loop, close your hand over the rest. And keep that braced against your abdomen, okay? King, the German Shepherd's another good dog to practice this with, so we can get him out too and do it. So start back there, so you have a little bit more of a runway.
Hey, buddy.
Yep, just go. And even if he's paying attention, still go through the motions. So whenever you're ready, just drop the slack. There you go. Now, did you feel what you did there?
Was that, I had like a little bit, I moved, I probably shouldn't have brought that hand down.
You did that, yeah. But you caught yourself doing it, which is good. Did you guys see it? So whenever you're ready, just drop the slack. There you go. Perfect. That was better. So the other thing that occurs is you'll be in a scenario where you're standing still and the dog got distracted and now he's like here, right? So first off, if you're not all the way at the end of the leash, it's easy from here, even if he were distracted and getting a little bit excited towards something there, from a standstill, I can still do the same thing, right? So I don't have to be starting this from motion, but the other thing that happens is maybe I wasn't paying attention and now I'm already in this position. I've got no slack. This isn't going to do anything if I turn and go now. I'm just going to pull him. You don't have the surprise factor of it. So what you do in that scenario is, while the dog's still distracted, let's have somebody come up just to see if they can get his attention a little bit, so I can demonstrate this. So just let him walk right up to you. So while he's distracted, I would kind of walk myself up the leash so that I can have this slack to give. Now I can drop my slack and go if I need it. Okay? Now I personally wouldn't generally do that while a dog's sniffing somebody. That was just for demonstration purposes. This would be more like she's still way back there and he's straining at the end of the leash trying to get to her, which is really a disrespectful thing to do, to be, like, I'm attached to the other end of this thing, why are you straining at the end of it, right? So that's where I would say, hey buddy, remember, pay attention to what I'm doing. So drop that slack out and go the other way, right? Now, what can help for this guy too, because he is a stronger dog. So sometimes he really needs that correction to be substantial. You can adjust the leash length so that the correction happens when you're pushing off this leg. Because for a dog like him, if you get a full rotation and you're like here, when he hits the end of the line, you may not have enough push to make the correction feel strong enough for him, right? So by making sure it comes off that left leg and that you're really pushing in that direction, you can get the intensity that you need based on the dog. He's a strong dog, and he can at times require a decent amount of intensity. Obviously, we've done this with him before, so he's a little better. I thought he'd test Jen a little bit more, but not too bad.
Yeah, he gets real amped when you try to move too fast.
Okay.
Like you gotta move like pretty slow with him.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I like this.
Yeah, yeah, he thinks it's a game then. Yeah. He's very playful, you know. But that's the other thing too that I've often seen when I'm teaching this technique is some people, they make it like, as they're about to turn, they do this thing, right? And you don't want to do that. Like, again, the whole idea is it should be a surprise to the dog. The dog didn't know you were turning, you know. Just all of a sudden they hit the end of the leash. So if you kind of like shuffle your feet or you just like go hop step and get ready to go, you're sort of cueing the dog into what you're doing. And again, it comes back to that you're making it seem like this very intentional act instead of an accidental thing. Like, I was just going the other way, man. I didn't realize you weren't following me.
Huge.
So walk a little bit closer and see if as he gets close to the people and the other dog, if he... There you go. Good. The other thing that I tell people all the time, this is a big one, this comes up in dog training in general, is a lot of times practicing this technique, we as humans have a tendency to only do this kind of turn when we know the dog is not paying attention, right? So essentially we're only doing it when we know the dog is going to fail. The problem with that is inherently anything that we're doing when it comes to our obedience with corrections, even though there's definitely like a punishment aspect to this, there's almost always a negative reinforcement component, right? When he does the right thing, the consequence doesn't happen, right? That's what encourages the correct response. We miss this all the time as dog owners and dog trainers. So what happens is, every time I make this kind of tight pivot, the dog fails and hits the end of the leash, right? So he never actually gets to learn that walking right here and paying attention wins the game. It's the repetitions where the dog successfully avoids the consequence that actually reinforce the behavior we want, right? That's what anchors in the correct response. If your overall goal is I want the dog to pay attention to me and to walk at my side on a slack leash, then you have to let the dog practice doing that and having it be successful where the other strategy failed, right? If I never let him do that, if I never do these pivots and drop the slack when I know he's going to win, he's got no reason to keep trying to do that because he doesn't know if it's actually effective or not. Because even though he went for the walk and maybe half of the walk he was doing beautiful, he still got corrected every time he pivoted because we're only pivoting when the dog's not paying attention, right? So once the dog starts to get it, once you start seeing the behavior you want, which should come quick, keep throwing in a lot of pivots purposefully to let the dog win the game. That's what builds the dog's confidence up, right? That's when you can have a dog that even though they got a decent correction, they feel totally confident on the walk because they know the strategy that works. But you've got to let them practice that. You've got to let the dogs rehearse success. It's so incredibly important. And it's not just true with this. It's with everything that we do in our obedience training or with negative reinforcement in general, right? We see this come up a lot. Let them get distracted. You can even be exciting over there, like, hey, what up, yeah. You're very bad at being excited.
I don't know how distracted you want me to get when I want
Yeah, you
to
can,
get
I
him
mean,
jumping up and down.
you can talk to them. Hey, puppy.
What's his name?
King. So do you see how, like, it felt like a little bit of lag there? Like, you turned, you did everything right, but the correction didn't really happen until you were, like, over here, and so there wasn't a lot of impact to it, right? So that's where you can adjust the leash length, like you might double it up a little bit, yeah, just like that. To find the length that based on, you know, the length of his body and your height, that the correction still comes off of this left leg. For a dog that you need to have a little bit of oomph in the correction. Some dogs you don't, it just needs to be a little bit. But some dogs it needs to be a little bit of oomph to it. So you want to make sure this position there has a lot more power than this.
Seems to be distracted by the dog too.
See the difference? All right?
Sorry.
No, I mean, it catches you off guard. But she didn't do anything different except
Shorten the leash.
shorten the leash and change what part of her footwork the correction came off of. And when you're sideways and your center of gravity is lower, it's a totally different impact than when you're here. It's so different. And that's why I emphasized when I was teaching you to push him. This motion of pushing off the leg, because that's when he got the correction. So that initial push. And the thing about that is, I don't have to like in Keeler, he talks about like turning and running the other way, right? We don't have to do that because I can just make this push a big push, and then I can walk. You know what I mean? You rarely have to, like I was exaggerating there for the sake of demonstration, but now you know, with him, we could probably find a happy medium. With the leash the right length, maybe I can make that turn a bit softer than I was before. And that's what we found with him. Amy and I were working with him early on, and Amy was really struggling to like, she was doing this and he just wasn't progressing, and we just adjusted that leash length, and it was like 2 repetitions, and he was like, yep, whatever you say goes, I got it. So let's try again. Now this time, he may not make that same mistake, right? He may just,
He won't even look at me.
yeah, because he wants to keep one eye on his owner, right? Do it again. Again, just let him practice winning. And the other thing I want you to avoid doing, this is a common thing too, is he was lagging behind a little bit, and right before you turned, you kind of brought him forward, right? So he's going like, hey, I get it.
Right.
You don't want me charging forward. You want me to pay attention. I'm going to stay where I can see you. I'm going to hang back here a little bit. And then we go, here, let me like fling you in this direction so that I can turn and correct you. When everything he was doing was trying to show you that he's got it, right? He learned the lesson. You know what I mean? So don't do that, right? Let him be a little bit behind if he wants to be behind.
Okay.
You know, he's trying to figure out, where do I got to be to win this game? You know? We don't want to force him into a position where he starts to feel like, I don't know, I can't see you now, you know. So do one more.